welcome to Digital Stratosphere, the podcast that provides independent and technology-agnostic advice to help organizations through their digital transformation journeys. This show will help you dial in on what it takes to drive a successful digital transformation. You will learn about the best practices and premier strategies used by industry leaders who have driven millions of dollars in net positive business transformations. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll cover another important element you need to know to make your digital transformation successful. My name is Sarah Dokovic, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for joining us today. We are in a day and age where nearly all organizations rely heavily on technology to operate. What does that mean for investors and private equity firms in particular? Well, in today's episode, we are going to discuss the key indicators that PE investors should be mindful of as they weigh their investment opportunities with prospective organizations. Stuart Robb is here today to share his insights on the due diligence that private equity firms should always facilitate, as well as what makes for a successful digital transformation and ultimately a successful investment. Stuart is the Vice President of Third Stage Consulting Europe, an independent and technology-agnostic digital transformation consulting firm. He and his team have worked with some of the world's leading organizations in their transformation journeys and have helped many private equity firms in their investment journeys when it comes to upgrading and transforming an organization's digital strategy. Stuart, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. How are you going?
Very well, thanks.
Hi, Sarah.
Hey. So I wanted to, because you guys are both new, I haven't had a chance to speak to either of you yet. Could you give us a bit of a background on what you guys are doing with Third Stage?
Well, I've started in the APAC region for Third Stage, and we're working in the area where we're sort of helping the digital transformation of companies, and so it's for them from an independent perspective, and so that seems to be a very important area when it comes to the amount of failures that ERP programs or digital transformation programs have.
Amazing.
My name's Stuart Robb. I'm Vice President of the European region. We've been running Third Stage in Europe. We're just over our 1 year mark. Had a really phenomenal growth in Europe despite all of the challenges that COVID-19 has presented us. And we've got a good client base. We're doing a lot in private equity, which is, I know we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. Yep. I'm a veteran of ERP. I've been doing it for 25 years. Before that, I was in IBM mainframes. So hopefully it should be an interesting session.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you both. But first of all, I wanted to talk about some recent news that you guys have gotten in as well. So SAP made a significant announcement yesterday regarding their intention to acquire Signavio. So Wayne, how about we talk to you about this? So could you tell us who Signavio are and why this announcement is super significant?
Well, Signavio traditionally has been a process mapping tool, and it's sort of had its success in the sense that it would go into a client and try and understand what processes they had by asking the client what they did and then map them. The challenge it had is it was a as is. So we talk about, people's assumption of what might actually happen, not really what happens. Mm-hmm. In recent years, Signavio has evolved to the point where it can actually look at what people actually do. And so this is the first time that SAP has really recognized the need for this, because to shift from S4, which is their flagship, S4HANA is their flagship program, there's a significant amount of change that's needed, both people and process change. And in the past, the tool they used was Solman, which is their tool that they have had around for a long, long time. Very clunky, very hard to use, and really didn't reflect the what people actually do in the process. And so by purchasing Signavio, that's recognizing that transformation is a massive part of a S4 journey. And whereas in the past it was all about the technology and how easy it was to use, I think they've realized that that's not necessarily the case anymore.
Wow, yeah. And we know that the cloud adoption of SAP S4HANA has been pretty slow, and companies have been reluctant to take the effort to migrate. So why do you think that is, and how does Signavio actually help that?
Well, the problem with cloud is that you have a single tenant. So if you're on that tenant with SAP, you might have hundreds of other companies all the same. So the need for that is to say that we need to be, all of the processes need to be the same, because to manage and update the software, we want everybody to be doing the same thing. In reality, that's not possible, because everyone has a competitive advantage, and they have what they call their secret sauce, as Eric calls it. It's those sorts of things that the cloud doesn't offer, and the software vendors like SAP haven't been able to build the maturity into the processes from a cloud perspective to allow a business to go, well, I could still be competitive here. What you're forcing me to do is be like everybody else. And what Signavio is doing is saying, well, I can now give you the opportunity where you can have processes that have those little things that actually make you special, and we can actually get real clarity on what that actually is. And so we can build that into what our cloud offering is, without compromising what we're trying to get away with cloud and AI and all those sort of things that flow out of that.
Awesome. And where does that then leave Celonis, SAP's existing partner? And what should clients be considering when thinking about moving forward with SAP in the process space?
Well, I think what SAP's probably done here is try and hedge their bets, because Celonis is a tool that actually can work with any system. So it can be an Oracle, it could be whatever. So it allows the ability to process mine and control the processes across any of the suites that are out there, that are SAP competitors. And even Signavio has a portion of that availability where it can actually look at other systems. And I think there's probably that fear that SAP was thinking that if we make it easy for others, then it's, we're going to risk our market share. And whereas this way it's trying to hedge the bets. Celonis is still a very strong tool, and probably is a bit more superior in the market than what Signavio is. But it's about, they probably are getting to the point where both of them are really helping that transformation space.
Awesome. And how do these process mining technologies help to underpin digital transformation in SAP clients?
Well, it's interesting to say, because the biggest challenge is that, and lots of times most people in ERP have had an ERP around for a long time. And so over that time, they've actually built and created their own little processes that they love and hold and find very, very useful for themselves. And when we move to a cloud offering, we're saying, well, those processes are no longer fit for purpose and we need to change. And you can imagine people trying to change, it's very, very difficult. If there's no reason for change, it's even harder. And so what this gives us is the insight to what that change should look like. So if I can see that things are taking longer, or I've got a lot of convoluted type additional processes that I've overlaid, that's adding no value to the business, all of a sudden that's clear and visible. It's like putting a crystal ball over the whole environment, and you can't argue with that. And so that starts to have intelligent change, as against we should change, and people don't really want to give up what they have done in the past. And so you get a halfway effort, whereas this way it gives you that, well, we need to change this because of this, and we have a really good understanding what that means. And the change becomes smaller and targeted, as against huge and unwieldy, which is often where S4 programs lose their way.
Awesome. So Signavio also does process mining for Salesforce. And I guess for those SAP customers with a Salesforce footprint, this must provide a real opportunity to improve their efficiency and effectiveness and get real transformation gain. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I suppose the marketplace has changed a little bit in the past, where instead of having a full ERP, we now have best of breed. So it gives that opportunity to be able to say, well, we could put Salesforce in and couple it up with our ERP. So we're not limiting ourselves. And I think that's probably a good thing for SAP to think about, in the sense that a lot of people don't just want to put in only SAP products. And so it's about having flexibility and making sure that you're giving organizations the opportunity, but you don't want to be discounting your opportunity. And I think that's why that's a good step for them to consider.
It's actually, I think it's also quite interesting in some ways. SAP have been a victim of their own success as well, because they've gone sort of from R3, ECC5 and ECC6 without really changing much in terms of the platform. And so all of those customizations that their clients have put in, that they really are afraid of re-engineering when they go to S4HANA because they can't take them with them. This does at least give them a route in to do that change, I guess, now.
Exactly right, Stuart. That's really the sweet spot, I suppose, that SAP is trying to tap to actually get people to feel comfortable about change. And I think that's where the resistance is stemmed from.
For sure. Awesome. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to add about this whole new kind of announcement before we kind of wrap it on and go into our next section?
Well, probably the only thing I was thinking was that what it does actually do is open up the ability for people to, this is going to make change a lot simpler for organizations. But the challenge they have is that they once again are still having a technology tell them what change needs to be. And the digital transformation is also still about the people part. So probably the view is from the software vendor that it's going to be easier and they will have much more control of it, but it still will require a significant effort from a change perspective and for the organization. And I think that's the area that SAP's struggled with Celonis, because Celonis has had this capability for probably 2 or 3 years and they've struggled to actually get people to actually take that up. Whereas you look at the disruptors or people that are looking for significant benefits in their business, like Uber and Siemens and those sort of organizations, they've embraced things like Celonis, so they actually get a competitive advantage by having really smooth, slick processes. And this now is one of those things that organizations need to really look at the way their operating model is, the whole digital transformation. There's a lot more questions they'll need to ask over and above just having another tool that can satisfy something for them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing those insights too, Wayne. I'm sure it's going to be super, super useful and super timely with everything that's happening too. So thank you. Alrighty, well, Stuart, now we have some questions for you as well about more on the private equity and ERP kind of side of things. So I wanted to start at the 50,000 foot view and set the stage. So what is a private equity firm?
Well, quite simply, Sarah, private equity refers to the capital that's invested in firms that are privately owned. So the difference between a publicly owned company is that the companies own it, the shareholders own it, and you can publicly buy and sell shares in that company. With a private equity investment, the investors in the private equity are the owners of the company. And so there's no publicly traded shares. Now, the reason that seems to be better is because the private equity firms can create more control over the investments that they make in the firms that they're buying. So typically a private equity firm would have a seat on the board, and they may well wholly own or own the majority of the company. And so they can much more tightly control how that company evolves, and therefore the returns that they can make on it. And generally, they think that private equity tends to outperform the market compared to traded shares. So that's why private equity exists. There are a couple of kind of sub fields in private equity that you might have heard of. One is venture capital, and that tends to be money that's put into new startup businesses to get them going and off the ground, and they tend to be longer term investments. And then the other is LBOs, which are leveraged buyouts. And leveraged buyouts are where you've borrowed money from the market to go and buy a company that already exists, and then you take ownership of that. That might have been a private company already, or it might be a publicly traded company that's been taken private, or a part of a larger organization that's been sold off and divested. So it's quite a wide field, but broadly speaking, it's basically the investment in private companies.
Got it. Makes total sense. Now, when a private equity firm is looking to invest in a company, understanding the existing technology likely plays a large role in their decision to invest. So how does the process usually work?
Well, it's quite interesting, actually, and we are seeing a little bit of a shift. The private equity houses have tended in the past to do the deal and then worry about the technology after they've closed. And that's left some PE firms with some quite big headaches to sort out. And so what we have been seeing actually over the last couple of years is private equity investors taking a much more close scrutiny of an acquisition target's technology estate to see how fit for purpose it is and how easy it is to going to be in terms of the new code that they create. Because some of these technological reinvestments now are pretty expensive and can actually affect the profitability of the deal.
Wayne, do you want to add anything to that? It looked like you wanted to say something. You're
Yeah,
more than welcome to chime in.
It's interesting. The technology piece has been a challenge for when someone takes over or is purchasing an organisation as such. They want to get the value out of that organisation, and technology plays a big part in that. And the announcement that we talked about with Signavio and SAP, it probably takes the pain out of that and probably puts softwares like SAP probably higher in priority for companies who are looking to say, well, I can now have a bit more comfort that what we do, we understand. Whereas before, it's like as Stuart mentioned, you buy something and you hope it's going to work, and not always is that the case. And that's where some of those headaches probably would have come from.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well that's quite interesting, I mean, pre-close on any of these deals, obviously you've got the lawyers crawling all over it, but your access to what really goes on inside the acquisition target is really pretty limited. And there are all sorts of regulations and requirements for data rooms and things like that are all put in place, to try and give you as much information as you can, but without disclosing the secret source of the company, I suppose, if you want to do that. But traditionally, it's been very much a financially driven thing. The lawyers and the due diligence would be all about the sales and the revenue numbers and the contractual liabilities. But it is becoming more common for them to be more inquisitive about the other sort of technological aspects, and that's particularly true because in many cases, unless you're doing an outright purchase of a business, you're going to be on some form of transitional service arrangement whilst you extract that business from its parent. And so understanding how that parent can service that business and working out what your plan is to extract that business has become quite a significant cost in the overall terms of the deal. And the lawyers tend not to have much experience about how much that costs or how long that takes. And so you get TSAs that are frequently too short and haven't built in sufficient money to build the new architecture. And we're seeing it less now, but we've seen a couple of deals where the amount of money and the amount of time put into a deal to get onto a new platform was just simply not even close to the truth.
Wow. So interesting. And let's kind of go off of that as well. I wanted to ask you, what are the key indicators that they should be looking for when evaluating the health of a company's existing ERP system, and whether a need for a digital transformation will fall in the window of their investment?
Yeah, I mean, the digital transformation thing is interesting because particularly when a PE firm is doing a straight purchase, the temptation is that once they've done the purchase, the business is already running. And so, we'll just leave it to grow and take our investment out in 5 years. And that some organizations tend to shy away from trying to optimize that business too much because they're worried about the risk of restructuring. They're worried about the ERP project going wrong. They're worried about the people and the change that Wayne was talking about. And so you almost get a bit of timidity in the way that the PE firm takes it. And again, we're seeing that change because with the advances in technology now, with robotic process automation and where we are with some of the automation in ERPs, if you don't take that opportunity to re-engineer and restructure the business to take advantage of some of this, you're going to be carrying it's lost profit. You're going to be carrying a company that is less profitable than the amount of money you could take out of it at the end. And of course, when you do come to divest from it and you do come to sell it, whoever's going to buy it's going to look at these same aspects and go, well, that technology is 15 years out of date, so they're going to put a lower value on that business. And if they've got a really slick, really lean comparative organization that has some recent leading edge practices and technologies sitting behind it. Yeah. So you talked about KPIs or key indicators. There are a few ways that you can get a feel for how good a company's ERP is without necessarily knowing every single thing about it. And so when you're early in the process and you're kind of going through this whole data room process, there are a few questions you can ask, like, can you tell me the profitability by product line? And if it's a good company with a good ERP and a good reporting mechanism and a good CRM they will be able to provide that answer to you pretty quickly. They will be able to turn that answer around either in a couple of hours or a couple of days. If after a week you're still struggling to get an answer, there's one of two reasons. They're either arguing with the lawyers about disclosing the information, or they're covering up for the fact that they can't actually produce it because their ERP doesn't give it to them. And so those kind of inquisitive questions can help to pull out how good it is. I mean, a couple of other examples, can you give me your 3PL costs and how you've optimized your distribution network? And again, if they've got a good transport management platform, that information is pretty easy to draw out because you can just run a couple of reports and out it comes. If they don't, they will probably try and hedge the answer to the question. So those are indicatively, just in one dimension, some questions that you can throw into the ring that will start to give you, a feel for where they might be leading edge and they might be, very mature, or they might be, trailing edge and, pretty basic in their operation.
Absolutely. Asking the right questions can get you some of those right answers, which is awesome. And assume that a PE firm has its eye on a particular company that could use a new software system to help optimize operations. Could a digital transformation be a strategy used by PE investors to improve and grow the business, or is it seen as a red flag that makes investors want to run the other direction?
Again, I think if you went back 5 years, the investors wouldn't even ask the question. They'd buy the company and then found out what a bag of bolts it was, usually a few weeks after they'd closed. And I think they're pushing their this much further up the agenda, much earlier in the conversation. I wouldn't have said that there is never an opportunity for digital transformation, because if you're taking over a company, and particularly if that company has been ingrained in a large organization, or if that company hasn't changed its ERP or its subsidiary systems for a number of years, you're going to get inherent inefficiencies, as Wayne was talking about, in terms of process engineering. And so there is always money to be had out of that re-engineering process. If you can put in accounts payable automation, you might be able to reduce your accounts payable headcount. But if you only pay 20 invoices a month, well, then that's not worth looking at. Look somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And so it can be seen as a red flag. And in fact, I was involved with a very large PE deal a number of years ago, where the company that I was involved in bought another company that had off another private equity firm. And that private equity firm had basically accumulated a number of companies. And rather than doing any optimization of those companies or harmonization of those systems, they just left it, didn't touch it. And what they ended up with was 8 plates worth of spaghetti with data flying all over this organization that was almost virtually impossible to unpick. And so when the company that I was involved with bought this nightmare, of course, then it became accountable for having to try to pull apart all this mess and put it back together again. Now, should they have bought the company? Yes, I mean, the financials made sense, but there was a huge cost in terms of unpicking this technical architecture and then getting it onto something that would work that hadn't been factored into the whole evaluation. And so, that became a real millstone around the business for several years while they tried to sort it all out.
Oh, wow. Wayne, did you want to add or have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think probably as Stuart talked about, part of this thing of buying companies, it's probably making technology easier to actually understand what you have. And so, it may actually change the way that companies do actually look at equity, private equity and ventures and those sorts of things, because they can get some of those insights up front in the due diligence if they frame it that way. And that allows them then to say, well, here's how much we would pay based on knowing this. Whereas in the past, it's like Stuart said, it's a bit of an educated guess from financials that, might lead you to believe it's a good company, but not considering the fact that you might have to spend a lot to actually get that company to either improve or maintain those financials. And so, these changes are happening in the space where it's more of informed understanding in the due diligence piece as against, well, let's hope it's right. And I think that's what Stuart sort of talked about.
Yeah, can make a huge difference down the road as well, I'm sure. And in your private equity investors playbook, you mentioned that a key feature from an ERP perspective is that the ERP solution, or at least the data and processes, need to be separated from the parent organization. So what are the different approaches a private equity firm might take to complete that separation?
So thank you, Sarah, for mentioning my book. It is free of charge, available for download, not at your local bookstore, but on the Third Stage website, plug. And it's all for free as well.
Free is the best price.
Yes, so I wrote a private equity investors playbook because I did feel that there's still quite a range of knowledge in the different private equity firms that I have dealt with. And it's quite interesting that a lot of the PE firms go to tier one consulting firms, to get their M&A advisory. And surprising how in some of the outcomes from that tier one really hasn't given them the insights that they ought to have got from an independent advisory, who looks at technical architecture. So I thought there was a gap, really, partly in what the Ps were expecting from their tier ones, but partly also from their own knowledge that was creating a gap that they weren't able to plug. And so the purpose of me writing the book was really just to try and be a ready reckoner or something for them to get their head around, so that they'd be able to go in and ask a few difficult questions themselves of their potential acquisitions, to give a bit of an early warning sign. So you said, what are the different approaches? Well, the first is a straight purchase, which is obviously where all the assets come with the company that you've acquired, including the ERP and including all the people to run it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the assets that you bought are very good. And so again, having bought the asset, you might find that the ERP is on some piece of software that long ago stopped being supported and only 10 people in the whole world know how to use, and 9 of them are in the company that you've just bought. Now, you're smiling, but this is true. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is a real example. I'm just not going to mention the company concerned. But there is an immediate imperative to get off of that platform because it is impeding the business's ability to move forward. It can't make it can't leverage its data. It can't leverage its value proposition because the ERP simply won't let it. And so that would be a typical example where you do it even in a straight purchase. You do some form of business transformation or business re-engineering and underpinned by technology change in order to uplift and drive optimization and efficiency in that company. The second approach is a separation, or could be a carve out, or it might be a spin split. There are various kind of transaction types. But broadly speaking, this is where typically you would buy a division of a larger company, and that would then be separated out and it would become a standalone company, and you'd have 12 months where you would have a transitional service arrangement with the parent, and at the end of that 12 months you'd be able to kind of stand on your own 2 feet. It's kind of likening it to, you know, your teenage son or daughter leaving home, right? They're still going to go into the bank of mum and dad for 12 months, and they're still going to need to be driven around everywhere. And after 12 months, mum and dad need a rest, want to go on holiday, and so the teenage gets told to get on with it. So there are 2 types of a product. There are lots of types. I mean, I'm massively overgeneralizing, but just to try and make this simple. There are 2 types of approach you can take in a carve out. One is called a clone and go, and the other one is a new instance. Now, clone and go basically says what we're going to do is we are going to take a copy of all of your systems in the parent, and we're going to set those up as a copy in our new company, and then we're going to crack on, and we'll basically be operating the same systems and the same network, the same infrastructure, sorry, the same data, and create the same reports as we did before. Now that's all very well, but that doesn't come without a price, and there's a butcher's bill to be paid for that. First of all, unpicking all the systems that you don't want or need in a clone and go can be a nightmare because of the way data weaves around a large organization. So if you were doing a real proper clone and go, you take a copy of all of the systems that created that cohesive architecture, but 30% of them you might not need. The second problem with a clone and go is one of size, because if the parent was a FTSE 100 or a Fortune 500 company, and the division that you've taken is 500 people, then putting in 6 instances of SAP and Workday and Salesforce and 1,500 other applications would be completely overkill and eye-wateringly expensive. And so whatever you'd save on having to re-implement a solution and what you'd save on retraining, you would spend tenfold on software licenses and infrastructure and all the rest of it. So clone and goes actually are not that common. They tend to be used only where, for example, I don't know, let's just say a pharmaceutical company decided to split into 2, you know, a European Union pharma company and a UK pharma company, to be a bit topical. And that, because those entities would be roughly equally sized at the end from the split from the whole, then doing a clone and go would actually be a pretty good solution because they're all huge anyway. So SAP is the only place they can go. More commonly, however, whatever you've carved out will be a relatively small entity out of a larger whole. Not always, but if you're talking about a £5 billion company, maybe the company that you've bought is a £500 million. And in that instance, then you'll almost certainly want to look at a new instance, because the new instance is going to be smaller and cheaper than your big SAP platform. But also it's going to give you the opportunity to optimize your new business and your new processes against a smaller platform. So it's going to force a change in terms of processes that wouldn't necessarily be forced if you were just cloning. And then the third avenue of separation is what's called a spin merge. And I've done 2 spin merges, and they are difficult. And the reason they're difficult is because what you're trying to do there is you're taking a company from the parent, and then you're trying to subsume that company into a company that either you already own or another company that you're buying. So you end up with 2 moving parts at once that you're trying to meld together, without knowing before you close precisely what each of those moving parts looks like. And so in terms of the kind of risk profile, a spin merge is, without any shadow of a doubt, the most complex of transactions. And we've seen, as I said, I've done a reasonably smallish sort of £100 million Mark 1, and I've done a, God knows how many, what it was, $5, $6, $7 billion one. And the challenges of trying to do one of that kind of scale, 15 to 20,000 people, in a timescale that's being dictated by the transitional service arrangement. Because don't forget, the parent is going to cut you off and, send you to university and leave you on your own. So you're under real time pressure. And so trying to do that is a really, really significant challenge. And so spin merges, because they're the most complex, are the ones that we generally recommend have the longest TSA arrangements, just because there's so many moving parts in that, there's more that can go wrong.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot for investors to consider when it comes to a company's digital platform, for sure. And as technology advances and continues building its prominence in business practices, the digital and technological health of a company's operations will continue as one of the drivers in investment decisions. So when we come back from a quick break, Stuart, Wade and I, we're going to dive into what it takes to fully uphold an existing software and undergo a digital transformation. Welcome back to the Digital Stratosphere podcast. I'm Sarah Dogovich, speaking with Stuart and Wayne from Third Stage Consulting, discussing everything a private equity investor needs to know about a company's digital health before diving into an investment. All right, so let's pivot into a bit of a discussion undergoing a full digital transformation in the lifespan of a PE firm's involvement in an organization. What are the key points that a PE firm should be aware of if they choose to invest in a company that is ready for a full digital transformation?
The full digital transformation can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And when we're talking about digital transformation in this context, how I think of it is really a business transformation that's underpinned by technological change. It really depends on what platform or what approach you're going to take as to how you're going to go about that business re-engineering. We talked about clone and go before the break, and we talked about how that, broadly speaking, would retain those processes as is, and that wouldn't require retraining, but you'd lose the opportunity to optimize the business by re-engineering the processes. So, you might think that the natural answer is, well, as soon as we've got that company, we should just embark on a a digital transformation, and we should get a new ERP in, and we should get all our processes in. But that might not be the optimal way of doing it, because you know, if you're not on a TSA, then you're actually letting that company bed in a bit under its new ownership, taking a bit more time to look at how the business runs, what the key metrics of the business are, what the business drivers are, where there's waste and possibilities for optimization, is a kind of a more considered approach than just charging in and transforming the business and kind of, I was going to say making it up as you go along, but you know, trying to find the opportunities as you go. If you're on a TSA, then your timescale is driven for you, and so you really have to try and pick out where is the sweet spot of optimization, in terms, as opposed to trying to do too much in a transformation when you're under time pressure. And I think we had a podcast last week where James Hayward, who is actually one of our clients, did a transformation in James, Defence Weekly, and that was really interesting, because that they had to build an organization from scratch. So it wasn't a question of they had to do a digital transformation. They didn't have a business. They didn't have accounts payable. They didn't have accounts receivable. They had to go and hire the people and put the technology in whilst they were hiring the people, and build the processes whilst they were hiring people, and develop the policies and the security and the governance and risk and compliance whilst they were recruiting the people. And that's hard, because you know, if you don't know what you want this to look like at the end, it's very hard to tell any kind of systems integrator or value-added reseller, I want it configured like this, because you're kind of building it up as you go. And so it doesn't necessarily follow that the day after you've closed a transaction, you should be firing off a business transformation. But conversely, your timescales might dictate that that's what you have to do, because otherwise you just run out of time.
Yeah, totally. Wayne, did you want to add anything into that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, Stuart, because you know, with the way you now can get that insight into systems and processes, you almost could say, well, let me cherry pick the processes I need to improve to get that value. Whereas before, you had to be probably a little bit concerned that you didn't know what you were venturing into. So it made sense to actually sit and wait and try and get a feel of the business. Whereas you now could actually overlay one of those process mining tools to be able to say, well, this process here really does need some work, and we now have the ability to work on that piece. So it takes away the need for a whole transformation, more of an evolution to improvement sort of thing.
Yeah, targeted improvement. Yeah, I completely agree with.
Yeah. And in what scenario would a company be better off implementing a best of breed ERP versus a single ERP solution?
The holy grail of every company is to have a single ERP solution. And why is that? Because it's all nicely in one package. All of the integrations have already been worked out for you. You've got one supplier with one throat to choke if something goes wrong. And the width of knowledge and training and change and process complexity is minimized by having everything in one ERP. So, you know, every company would love if there was the fantastic all singing, all dancing package out there that would do everything perfectly for a company. Then that company would have, you know, probably bitten the vendor's arm off. The problem is that all packages are not equal. So I could be an S4HANA client, and I might be very happy with S4HANA for my manufacturing and for my materials management and my potency management, but it simply isn't good enough for my marketing and my CRM. And so I would have to go to Salesforce and Pareto or similar to do my marketing and CRM. And then I might go, well, do you know what? The Salesforce e-commerce is pretty good, but Magneto, keep doing that. So what you might find is that they say, well, my Salesforce is, good enough and really nice in the marketing space, but its e-commerce is just not what I need. So, I might then go to Magento and say, right, I need this really good e-commerce platform. And you can do that all the way down the stack. So you can end up with Salesforce, Salesforce marketing, Salesforce CRM, Magneto e-commerce, Blue Jay transport management, Blue Yonder warehouse management. And so you get in a whole plethora of different packages, which are best of breed packages, depending on the need of your business. So there's a tension between having the very simple ERP that has everything all in its one box, and having the very best of every layer of the application, even right the way down to HR and sort of systems like Workday and so forth, that give you all of the bells and singing, dancing whistles.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think singing dancing whistles is a thing, but anyway.
Hey, now it is.
It is. Yeah, we've invented something new then. So when we go in, what we try to do when we look at an investment is to see how much of that business has complexity or a unique value proposition. So something that makes it differentiating from other industries in its sector. And we tend to focus on that. So if we don't get a lot of accounts payable transactions in a month, if we don't have a big problem with accounts receivable and our day sales outstanding is pretty low, then we won't look beyond the ERP to perform those functions. Whereas if we have huge number of supplier invoices coming in, then we definitely look at AP automation. So something like Ariba for SAP, or Proactis, or Coupa for supplier management, and supplier portals and self-service and all of that kind of stuff. And again, in AR, High Radius or Carivo or any one of those kind of products. I think Blackline just bought a product as well in the accounts receivable space. Those would be good when you've got a big accounts receivable problem. But if you just have 15 days DSO and you have 500 customers, the overhead and cost of having that High Radius or Carivo capability, the licenses, the additional configuration, the additional training, and on and on and on it goes, just wouldn't be worth it. So almost by an application layer, you're doing a micro business case to say, is the ERP good enough, or do we need to go outside of the ERP and look for a specialist piece of software that can provide that function? And the way I kind of characterize it is an ERP is averagely good at everything. Yeah, so if I want to take my kids up to the zoo or something, then I need a car with 5 seats and an estate car because it needs a boot, and it should be reasonably economical and yada, yada, yada. Now, if I'd gone and bought a Ferrari, then that would be hopeless if I've got a wife and 2 kids, because the 2 kids haven't got anywhere to sit, and there's nowhere to put the packed lunch, and there's nowhere to, and on and on it goes. So, your MPV or your Range Rover or whatever is going to be your good day-to-day kids car. But if you want to go and do track days, well, then you need your Ferrari or your Porsche or something like that. And so that's how we kind of think about the architecture, and we look at the end state.
Awesome. Well explained. Appreciate that. And when implementing new software and migrating from the old solution to the new solution, one of the biggest challenges is likely data migration. So what are some best practices or even key considerations to keep in mind when you embark on the data migration segment of the transformation?
There's only one thing in data migration: that's start immediately. always takes more time than you think it's going to. It always is more problematic. Getting data out of SAP from a legacy system, making sure it's your data, and then transforming it into data that your new co can use, is never a smooth process. And it needs to be done and rehearsed and reloaded and retransformed over and over and over and over and over and over again through the life cycle of the project before it's actually safe to load it. So a typical good example would be, a PE company I did some work for a few years ago. So yeah, we're going to just take a copy of the data from the parent, and we're going to load that, and that'll be fine. I went, oh yeah. And I went, oh yeah, we've looked into it. I knew that was the kiss of death. As soon as they said yes, we've looked into it, I knew they hadn't. So I said, right. So you got the Northampton warehouse as part of the deal, haven't you? And they said yes. Right, but have you got the, I can't remember whether it was Weybridge or, no, it wasn't Weybridge, it was something beginning with Weymouth warehouse. And they said no. And I said, right, so all of that data that's going to come across every time it refers to the Weymouth warehouse is going to blow up, because there is no Weymouth warehouse. Or you're going to have Weymouth warehouse in the new system, and people are still going to be able to select Weymouth warehouse as a place to send goods for storage or whatever, except that it won't be your Weymouth warehouse, because there is no Weymouth warehouse. So you've got to take Weymouth warehouse out of the reference data, but you've also got to take it out of all the transactional data, because all the stuff that is currently in Weymouth warehouse is going to have to move somewhere else. So where's it moving to? And it's that point that the penny started to drop, that you can't not touch data. And data permeates through an entire ecosystem of an organization. And this becomes especially true when you're trying to think about reporting. So what you're going to do is you're going to rip half the heart or a quarter of the heart out of a company. And so all of the vein, and stick it in something else. So all of the veins and arteries and all of that are all going to be, a subset of what they were. But you're not going to have all of that full data necessarily that you had before. Are you carrying across all of your historical and archive data that will still drive your reports to work? What happens if you don't take System X from the parent, and System X is providing you with data Y that fed all of these reports? All of those reports are now going to break. And in fact, what we usually recommend is actually forget any of the reports you used to get. Tell us what the key drivers of your business are. Tell us what the key data attributes are that inform those key drivers, and start a new reporting architecture from scratch.
Interesting. What about you, Wayne? Do you have any kind of considerations to add on?
Yeah, totally agree there, Stuart. I think the other big challenge is that when we come from old systems, we are very fixed on structured data, and so structured data is structured in a certain way. And when we overlay a new company in there, we may have different structures or different ways we actually want to view that. And so the ability to be able to access that data to, as Stuart talks about, reporting, actually even transact, is quite limited. And so it's almost like you need to consider some of the newer technology where you're actually building things like data lakes and those sort of things, because the data in there can actually be unstructured, and you actually just access the information you need, as against needing the total data construct to actually leverage that off. And so it's about thinking about what you want in your reporting and what information you need differently, and how you can actually access that, because the old way of structured data makes it very limited, very hard. It's like having a bookshelf where, all the books are in a certain way, and you're the new company, you like them another way, and the sizes don't match and those sort of things. It's quite a complex area when we talk about data migration, historical data, and our access to it moving forward.
Absolutely. And how have you and your team helped private equity firms, especially during their transformations? And do you guys happen to have any success stories that stand out that you are able to share with us?
Well, all of the companies that I've ever been involved in M&A are still trading. So I think that's possibly a success story. I'm not quite sure how much of a success that is, but I mean, I've been doing M&A for quite a long time. Obviously, with third stage, it's more recent. We've been going only for the last sort of year, coming up to 18 months now, actually, in Europe. But even then, I mean, we've done James Defence Weekly, which, as I mentioned earlier, James Hayward, who was the CFO, was on our podcast last week with Eric talking about that. So I won't bore you to death too much with repeating all of the work at James. But that was a carve out from a big publishing company, IHS Markit, an old SAP system, legacy, that had itself been merged, because IHS and Market merged, and then they divested themselves of James. And so all of those issues around, trying to get the data out, trying to get it clean, were significant. Trying to develop a ERP when there were no people to talk to about it. There was no AR manager, there was no AP manager that hadn't been recruited yet. So all of those were, those typical sort of challenges that we have to face into. Another one we did with a PE organisation was a carve out from Kodak, actually. They do lithographic printing, multinational. They got manufacturing in Japan and China, and they retail across the world. And that was interesting because they, again, coming from another SAP monolith, that was an SAP system that I think Noah had in the Ark. But we got them onto Infor M3. Very proud to say that Infor M3 does finally been proven to work. So really good news there. But it actually went very well, and Infor can be a bit tricky to get in successfully, but it shows that there's actually nothing wrong with that product. It's a very good product, very good in manufacturing. Demand planning is very good in it. All around the implementation management, and we were very lucky in that the CIO who ran that for the PE company, very experienced, very good guy, and really kept a cast iron grip on it. The other thing we did at the carve out for Kodak as well, which is quite interesting, we got very heavily involved in the contracts because the CIO wanted watertight contracts, and he wanted to know what good looked like. So a lot of the advisory that we gave early in the process was around contract benchmarking. What have companies got in other organizations? What terms and conditions? What are they supposed to be paying? Without breaching any confidentialities, we can, say, yes, we think that's a good deal, or no, we think there's more to go in that. And that was a real benefit to this organization. They got real value out of having that clarity on cost, and actually being able to manage that cost very, very tightly, which astonishingly meant that it came in on budget and on time, which is almost unheard of for any ERP project. And then I worked with a company which was an outright acquisition of a travel management company. I worked at a software company that bought another multi-billion-dollar software company about 3 years ago. And that was a real challenge, that just enormous undertaking. So that was a very interesting project to work on, but I think it probably aged my life by 10 years and 6 months on that. In fact, I'm only 21. All this grey hair is just a result of that project. And we're working on one now. In fact, it closes on Monday. And so we've been working with this organisation on the future state architecture and the due diligence process on the architecture. This is a spin merge, so my least favourite, or my most favourite actually, because they're the most interesting and the most difficult, but they're also ones that give you the biggest heart problems. But this one's in the UK education sector, large-ish combined company, will be a large-ish company. And so that will be an exciting year's worth of work for Third Stage to help support this endeavour going forward.
Amazing. Well, you guys are doing incredible things. Absolutely keep going. And I wanted to thank you both for being here. So if our listeners wanted to learn more about the best practices around mergers and acquisitions, what are some resources that you might suggest for them?
Read my book. Yeah, read the book. As I said, there's lots and lots and lots and lots on M&A. And you know, the bookshelves worth of stuff on Amazon. I mean, I used to work at EY, and so you know, I was involved in that a little bit when during my time at EY, which is about 20 years ago now. But very little about technology in M&A, and that's why I said I think that is a gap that hasn't been, you know, well explained to PE companies. And so hopefully what we've done in Third Stage with this podcast and with this little free, I was going to call it a booklet, but it is actually about 48 pages. So there's quite a lot of content in it. But you know, with this playbook, hopefully it'll give some people some insights into what to look out for and some key questions that they can ask and some thinking around how we go about looking at what the future state for a spin merge or a carve out looks like.
Amazing. Well, Stuart, Wayne, it's been so real. You have shared so many insights today. So I really appreciate both of your times today.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Of course. And thank you all for listening. My name is Sarah Dokovic, and we'll see you next time on our next episode of the Digital Stratosphere podcast.